Chapter 6 The Deputy Procureur du Roi. In one of the aristocratic mansions built by Puget in the Rue des Grand Cours opposite the Medusa Fountain, a second marriage feast was being celebrated, almost at the same hour with the nuptial repast given by Dante. In this case, however, although the occasion of entertainment was similar, the company was strikingly dissimilar. Instead of a rude mixture of sailors, soldiers, and those belonging to the humblest grade of life, the present assembly was composed of the very flower of Marseilles society, magistrates who had resigned their office during the usurper's reign, officers who had deserted from the imperial army and joined forces with Condé, and younger members of families brought up to hate and execrate the man whom 5 years of exile would convert into a martyr, and 15 of restoration elevate to the rank of a god. The guests were still at the table, and the heated and energetic conversation that prevailed betrayed the violent and vindictive passions that then agitated each dweller of the South, where unhappily for 5 centuries religious strife had long given increased bitterness to the violence of party feeling. The emperor, now king of the petty island of Elba, after having held sovereign sway over 1/2 of the world, counting as his subjects a small population of 5,000 or 6,000 souls, after having been accustomed to hear the Vive Napoleons of 120 millions of human beings uttered in the 10 different languages, was looked upon here as a ruined man, separated forever from any fresh connection with France or claim to her throne. The magistrates freely discussed their political views. The military part of the company talked unreservedly of Moscow and Leipzig, while the women commented on the divorce of Josephine. It was not over the downfall of the man, but over the defeat of the Napoleonic idea that they had rejoiced, and in this they foresaw for themselves the bright and cheering prospect of a vivified political existence. An old man decorated with the cross of St. Louis now rose and proposed to the health of King Louis XVIII. It was the Marquis de Saint-Méran. This toast, recalling at once the patient exile of Hartwell and the peace-loving King of France, excited universal enthusiasm. Glasses were elevated in the air de l'Anglaise, and the ladies snatched their bouquets from their fair bosoms, strewn the table with their floral treasures. In a word, an almost poetical fervor prevailed. "Ah," said the Marquis de Saint-Méran, a woman with a stern, forbidding eye, though still noble and distinguished in appearance, despite her 50 years. "Ah, these revolutionists who have driven us from those very possessions they afterwards purchased for a mere trifle during the reign of terror, would be compelled to own, were they here, that all true devotion was on our side, since we were content to follow the fortunes of a falling monarch, while they, on the contrary, made their fortune by worshipping the rising sun. Yes, they could not help admitting that the king for whom we sacrificed rank, wealth, and station was truly our Louis the Beloved, while their wretched usurper has been, and ever will be, to them their evil genius, their Napoleon the accursed. Am I not right, Villefort?" "I beg your pardon, madam. I really must pray you to excuse me, but in all truth I was not attending to the conversation." Marquis," interposed the old nobleman who had proposed the toast. "Let the young people alone. Let me tell you, on one's wedding day there are more agreeable subjects of conversation than dry politics." "Never mind, dearest mother," said a young and lovely girl, with a profusion of light brown hair, and eyes that seemed to float in liquid crystal. "'Tis all my fault for seizing upon M. de Villefort, so as to prevent his listening to what you said. But there, now take him, he is your own for as long as you like. Villefort, I beg to remind you my mother speaks to you." "If the Marquis will deign to repeat the words I but imperfectly caught, I shall be delighted to answer," said M. de Villefort. "Never mind, Renée," said the Marquis, with a look of tenderness that seemed out of keeping with her harsh, dry features. "But however all other feelings may be withered in a woman's nature, there is always one bright smiling spot in the desert of her heart, and that is the shine of maternal love. I forgive you. What I was saying, Villefort, was that the Bonapartists had not our sincerity, enthusiasm, or devotion." "They had, however, what supplied the place of those fine qualities," replied the young man, "and that was fanaticism. Napoleon is the Mahomet of the West, and is worshipped by his commonplace but ambitious followers, not only as a leader and lawgiver, but also as the personification of equality. He, cried the Marquis, Napoleon, the type of equality. For mercy's sake, then, what would you call Robespierre? Come, come, do not strip the latter of his just rights to bestow them on the Corsican, who, to my mind, has usurped quite enough. Nay, madam, I would place each of these heroes on his right pedestal, that of Robespierre on his scaffold in the Place Louis Quinze, that of Napoleon on the column of Place Vendôme. The only difference consists in the opposite character of the equality advocated by these two men. One is the equality that elevates, the other is the equality that degrades. One brings a king within reach of the guillotine, the other elevates the people to a level with the throne. Observe, said Villefort, smiling, I do not mean to deny that both these men were revolutionary scoundrels, and that the 9th Thermidor and the 4th of April in the year 1814 were lucky days for France, worthy of being gratefully remembered by every friend to monarchy and civil order. And that explains how it comes to pass that fallen, as I trust he is forever, Napoleon still retained a train of parasitical satellites. Still, Marquis, it has been so with other usurpers. Cromwell, for instance, who was not half so bad as Napoleon, had his partisans and advocates. Do you know, Villefort, that you are talking in a most dreadfully revolutionary strain? But I excuse it. It is impossible to expect the son of Girondin to be free from the small spice of the old heaven. The deep crimson suffused the countenance of Villefort. "'Tis true, madam," answered he, "that my father was a Girondin, but he was not among the number of those who voted for the king's death. He was an equal sufferer with yourself during the reign of terror, and had well nigh lost his head on the same scaffold on which your father perished." "True," replied the Marquis, without wincing in the slightest degree at the tragic remembrance thus called up. "But bear in mind, if you please, that our respective parents underwent persecution and proscription from diametrically opposite principles. In proof of which I may remark that while my family remained among the staunchest adherents of the exiled princes, your father lost no time in joining the new government, and that while the citizen Nordier was a Girondin, the Count Nordier became a senator." "Dear mother," interposed Renée, "you know very well it was agreed that all these disagreeable reminiscences should be forever laid aside." "Suffer me also, madam," replied Villefort, "to add my earnest request to Mademoiselle de Saint Méran, that you will kindly allow the veil of oblivion to cover and conceal the past. What avails recrimination over matters wholly past recall? For my own part, I have laid aside even the name of my father, and altogether disown his political principles. He was, nay, probably may still be, a Bonapartist, and is called Nordier. I, on the contrary, am a staunch royalist, and style myself de Villefort. Let what remain of revolutionary sap exhaust itself and die away with the old trunk, and condescend only to regard the young shoot which has started up at a distance from the parent tree, without having the power any more than the wish to separate entirely from the stock from which it sprung." "Bravo, Villefort!" cried the Marquis. "Excellently well said. Come now, I have hopes of obtaining what I have been for years endeavoring to persuade the Marquis to promise, namely a perfect amnesty and forgetfulness of the past." "With all my heart," replied the Marquis. "Let the past be forever forgotten. I promise you it affords me as little pleasure to revive it as it does you. All I ask is that Villefort will be firm and inflexible for future in his political principles. Remember also, Villefort, that we have pledged ourselves to his Majesty for your fealty and strict loyalty, and that at our recommendation the king consented to forget the past as I do." And here she extended her hand to him. "As I now do at your entreaty. But bear in mind that there should fall in your way anyone guilty of conspiring against the government, you will be so much the more bound to visit the offence with rigorous punishment, as it is known you belong to a suspected family." "Alas, madame," replied Villefort, "my profession, as well as the times in which we live, compels me to be severe. I have already successfully conducted several public prosecutions, and brought the offenders to merited punishment. But we have not done the thing yet." "Do you indeed think so?" inquired the Marquis. I am at least fearful of it. Napoleon in the island of Elba is too near France, and his proximity keeps up the hope of his partisans. Marseille is filled with half-pay officers who are daily, under one frivolous pretext or another, getting up quarrels with the royalists. From hence arise continual and fatal duels among the higher classes of persons, and assassinations in the lower. You have heard, perhaps, said the Comte de Salvoux, one of M. de Saint-Méran's oldest friends, the Chamberlain, the Comte d'Ars, and the Holy Alliance removing him from thence. Yes, they were talking about it when we left Paris, said M. de Saint-Méran. And where is it decided to transfer him? To St. Helena. For heaven's sake, where is that? Asked the Marquis. An island situated on the other side of the equator, at least 2,000 leagues from here, replied the Count. So much the better. As Villefort observes, it is a great act of folly to have left such a man between Corsica, where he was born, and Naples, of which his brother-in-law is king, and face to face with Italy, the sovereignty of which he coveted for his son. Unfortunately, said Villefort, there are not the treaties of 1814, and we cannot molest Napoleon without breaking those compacts. Oh, well, we shall find some way out of it, responded M. de Salvieux. There wasn't any trouble over treaties when it was a question of shooting the poor Duc d'Enghien. Well, said the Marquis, it seems probable that, by the aid of the Holy Alliance, we shall be rid of Napoleon, and we must trust to the vigilance of M. de Villefort to purify Marseille of his partisans. The king is either a king or no king. If he be acknowledged as sovereign of France, he should be upheld in peace and tranquillity, and this can best be effected by employing the most inflexible agents to put down every attempt at conspiracy. 'Tis the best and surest means of preventing mischief. Unfortunately, madam, answered Villefort, the strong arm of the law is not called upon to interfere until the evil has taken place. Then all he has got to do is to endeavor to repair it. Nay, madam, the law is frequently powerless to effect this. All it can do is to avenge the wrong done. Oh, M. de Villefort, cried a beautiful young creature, daughter to the Comte de Salvoux, and the cherished friend of Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, do try and get up some famous trial while we are at Marseille. I never was in law court. I am told it is very amusing. Amusing, certainly, replied the young man, and instead of shedding tears, as at the fictitious tale of woe produced at a theatre, you behold in a law court a case of real and genuine distress, a drama of life. The prisoner whom you see there, pale, agitated, and alarmed, instead of, as is the case when the curtain falls on a tragedy, going home to sup peacefully with his family, and then retiring to rest that he may recommence his mimic woes on the morrow, is removed from your sight, merely to be reconducted to his prison and delivered up to the executioner. I leave you to judge how far your nerves are calculated to bear you through such a scene. Of this, however, be assured, that should any favorable opportunity present itself, I will not fail to offer you the choice of being present. For shame, M. de Villefort, said Renée, becoming quite pale. Don't you see how you are frightening us, and yet you laugh? What would you have done? 'Tis like a duel. I have already recorded sentence of death 5 or 6 times against the mover of political conspiracies. And who can say how many daggers may have been ready sharpened, and only waiting a favorable opportunity to be buried in my heart? Gracious heavens, M. de Villefort, said Renée, becoming more and more terrified. You surely are not in earnest. Indeed, replied the magistrate with a smile, and in the interesting trial that young lady is anxious to witness, the case would only still be more aggravated. Suppose, for instance, the prisoner, as is much more probable, to have served under Napoleon. Well, can you expect for an instant that one accustomed, at the word of his commander, to rush fearlessly on the very bayonets of his foe, will scruple more to drive a stiletto into the heart of one he knows to be his personal enemy, than to slaughter his fellow creatures, merely because bidden to do so by one he is bound to obey? Besides, one requires the excitement of being hateful in the eyes of the accused, in order to lash one's self into a state of sufficient vehemence and power. I would not choose to see the man against whom I pleaded smile, as though in mockery of my words. No, my pride is to see the accused pale, agitated and though beaten out of all composure by the fire of my eloquence. Renee uttered a smothered exclamation. "Bravo!" cried one of the guests. "That is what I call talking to some purpose." "Just the person we require at a time like the present," said a second. "What a splendid business that last case of yours was, my dear Villefort," remarked a third. "I mean the trial of the man for murdering his father. Upon my word, you killed him ere the executioner had laid his hand upon him." "Oh, as for parricides, and such dreadful people as that," interposed Renee, "it matters very little what is done to them, but as regards poor unfortunate creatures whose only crime consists in having mixed themselves up in political intrigues, why that is the very worst offence they could possibly commit. For don't you see, Renee, the king is the father of his people, and he who shall plot or contrive aught against the life and safety of the parent of 32 millions of souls is a parricide upon a fearfully great scale." "I don't know anything about that," replied Renee, "but M. de Villefort, you have promised me, have you not, always to show mercy to those I plead for?" "Make yourself quite easy on that point," answered Villefort with one of his sweetest smiles. "You and I will always consult upon our verdicts." "My love," said the Marquis, "attend to your doves, your lapdogs and embroidery, but do not meddle with what you do not understand. Nowadays the military profession is in abeyance, and the magisterial robe is for the badge of honor. There is a wise Latin proverb that is very much in point. "Sedant arma toga," said Villefort with a bow. "I cannot speak Latin," responded the Marquise. "Well," said Renee, "I cannot help regretting you had chosen some other profession than your own, a physician, for instance. Do you know I always felt a shudder at the idea of even destroying Angel?" "Dear good Renee," whispered Villefort as he gazed with unutterable tenderness on the lovely speaker. "Let us hope, my child," cried the Marquis, "that M. de Villefort may prove the moral and political physician of this province. If so, he will have achieved a noble work, and one which will go far to efface the recollection of his father's conduct," added the incorrigible Marquis. "Madame," replied Villefort with a mournful smile, "I have already had the honor to observe that my father has, at least I hope so, abjured his past errors, and that he is, at the present moment, a firm and zealous friend to religion and order, a better royalist possibly than his son, for he has to atone to past dereliction, while I have no other impulse than warm, decided preference and conviction." Having made this well-turned speech, Villefort looked carefully around to mark the effect of his oratory, much as he would have done had he been addressing the bench in open court. "Do you know, my dear Villefort," cried the Comte de Salvo, "this is exactly what I myself said the other day at the Tuileries, when questioned by His Majesty's principal chamberlain touching the singularity of an alliance between the son of a Girondin and the daughter of an officer of Duc de Condé, and I assure you he seemed fully to comprehend that this mode of reconciling political differences was based upon sound and excellent principles." Then the king, who without our suspecting it had overheard our conversation, interrupted us by saying, "Villefort, observe that the king did not pronounce the word Nordier, but on the contrary placed considerable emphasis on that of Villefort. Villefort," said his Majesty, "is a young man of great judgment and discretion, who will be sure to make a figure in his profession. I like him much, and it gave me great pleasure to hear that he was about to become the son-in-law of the Marquis and the Marquise de Saint Méran. I should myself have recommended the match, had not the noble Marquis anticipated my wishes by requesting my consent to it." "Is it possible the king could have condescended so far as to express himself so favourably of me?" asked the enraptured Villefort. "I give you his very words, and if the Marquis chooses to be candid, he will confess that they perfectly agree with what his Majesty said to him, when he went 6 months ago to consult him upon the subject of espousing his daughter." "That is true," answered the Marquis. "How much do I owe this gracious prince? What is there I would not do to evince my earnest gratitude?" "That is right," called the Marquis. "I love to see you thus. Now then, were a conspirator to fall into your hands, he would be most welcome." For my part, dear mother, interposed Renee, I trust your wishes will not prosper, and that Providence will only permit petty offenders, poor debtors, and miserable cheats to fall into M. de Villefort's hand. Then I shall be contented. Just the same as though you prayed that a physician might only be called upon to prescribe for headaches, measles, and the sting of wasps, or any other slight affection of the epidermis. If you wish to see me the king's attorney, you must desire for me some of those violent and dangerous diseases from the cure of which so much honor redounds to the physician. At this moment, and as though the utterance of Villefort's wish had sufficed to effect its accomplishment, a servant entered the room, and whispered a few words in his ear. Villefort immediately rose from the table and quitted the room upon the plea of urgent business. He soon, however, returned, his whole face beaming with delight. Renée regarded him with fond affection, and certainly his handsome features, lit up as they were then, were with more than usual fire and admiration, seemed formed to excite the innocent admiration with which she gazed on her graceful and intelligent lover. You were wishing just now, said Villefort, addressing her, that I were a doctor instead of a lawyer? Well, I at least resemble the disciples of Aeschylus in one thing. People spoke in this style in 1815, that of not being able to call a day my own, not even that of my betrothal. And wherefore were you called away just now? Asked Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran with an air of deep interest. For a very serious matter, which bids fair to make work for the executioner. How dreadful! Exclaimed Renée, turning pale. Is it possible? Burst simultaneously from all who were near the magistrate to hear his words. Why, if my information prove correct, a sort of Bonapartist conspiracy has just been discovered. Can I believe my ears? Cried the Marquis. Will you read the letter containing the accusation at least? Said Villefort. The king's attorney is informed by a friend to the throne and the religious institutions of this country that one named Edmond Dantès, mate of the ship Pharaon, this day arrived from Smyrna after having touched at Naples and Porto Ferrajo, has been the bearer of a letter from Murat to the usurper, and again taken charge of another letter from the usurper to the Bonapartist club in Paris. Ample corroboration of this statement may be obtained by arresting the above-mentioned Edmond Dantès, who carries the letter for Paris about with him, or has it at his father's abode. Should it not be found in the possession of father or son, then it will be assuredly discovered in the cabin belonging to said Dantès on board the Pharaon. But, said Renée, this letter, which, after all, is but an anonymous scribble, is not even addressed to you, but to the king's attorney. True, but that gentleman being absent, his secretary, by his orders, opened his letters. Thinking this one of importance, he sent for me, but not finding me, took upon himself to give the necessary orders for arresting the accused party. Then the guilty person is absolutely in custody, said the Marquise. Nay, dear mother, say the accused person. You know we cannot pronounce him guilty. He is in safe custody, answered Villefort, and rely upon it, if the letter is found, he will not be likely to be trusted aboard again, unless he goes forth under the especial protection of the headsman. And where is the unfortunate being? asked Renée. He is at my house. Come, my friend, interrupted the Marquise, do not neglect your duty to linger with us. You are the king's servant, and must go wherever that service calls you. Oh, Villefort, cried Renée, clasping her hands, and looking towards her lover with piteous earnestness, be merciful on this day of our betrothal. The young man passed round to the side of the table where the fair pleader sat, and leaning over her chair, said tenderly, to give you pleasure, my sweet Renée, I promise to show all the lenity in my power. But if the charges brought against this Bonapartist hero prove correct, why then you really must give me leave to order his head to be cut off. Renée shuddered at the word cut, for the growth in question had a head. Never mind the foolish girl, Villefort, said the Marquise. She will soon get over these things. So saying, Madame de Saint-Méran extended her dry, bony hand to Villefort, who, while imprinting a son-in-law's respectful salute on it, looked at Renée as much to say, I must try and fancy 'tis your dear hand I kiss, and it should have been. These are mournful auspices to accompany a betrothal, sighed poor Renee. Upon my word, child, exclaimed the angry Marquise, your folly exceeds all bounds. I should be glad to know what connection there can possibly be between your sickly sentimentality and the affairs of the state. Oh, mother, murmured Renee. Nay, madam, I pray you pardon this little traitor. I promise you that to make up for her want of loyalty I will be most inflexibly severe. Then casting an expressive glance at his betrothed, which seemed to say, fear not, for your dear sake, my justice will be tempered with mercy. And receiving a sweet and approving smile in return, Villefort departed with paradise in his heart. Chapter 7. The Examination. No sooner had Villefort left the salon than he assumed the grave air of a man who holds the balance of life and death in his hands. Now, in spite of the nobility of his countenance, the command of which, like a finished actor, he had carefully studied before the glass, it was by no means easy for him to assume an air of judicial severity, except the recollection of the line of politics his father had adopted, and which might interfere, unless he acted with the greatest prudence, with his own career. Gerard de Villefort was as happy as man could be. Already rich, he held a high official situation, though only 27. He was about to marry a young and charming woman whom he loved, not passionately, but reasonably, as became a deputy attorney of the king. And besides her personal attractions, which were very great, Mademoiselle de Saint Méran's family possessed considerable political influence, which they would of course exert in his favor. The dowry of his wife amounted to 50,000 crowns, and he had besides the prospect of seeing her fortune increase to 500,000 at her father's death. These considerations naturally gave Villefort a feeling of such complete felicity that his mind was fairly dazzled in its contemplation. At the door he met the commissary of police who was waiting for him. The sight of this officer recalled Villefort from the third heaven to earth. He composed his face, as we have before described, and said, I have read the letter, sir, and you have acted rightly in arresting this man. Now inform me what you have discovered concerning him and the conspiracy. We know the conspiracy, monsieur. All the papers found have been sealed up and placed on your desk. The prisoner himself is named Edmond Dantès, mate on board the three-master, the Pharaon, trading in cotton with Alexandria and Smyrna, and belonging to the son of Marseille. Before he entered the merchant service, had he ever served in the marine? Oh, no, monsieur, he is very young. How old? 19 or 20 at the most. At this moment, as Villefort had arrived at the corner of the Rue des Conciles, a man who seemed to have been waiting for him approached. It was M. Morrel. Ah, M. de Villefort, cried he, I am delighted to see you. Some of your people have committed the strangest mistake. They have just arrested Edmond Dantès, mate of my vessel. I know it, monsieur, replied Villefort, and I now am going to examine him. Oh, said Morrel, carried away by his friendship. You do not know him, and I do. He is the most estimable, the most trustworthy creature in the world, and I will venture to say there is not a better seaman in all the merchant service. Oh, and de Villefort, I beseech your indulgence for him. Villefort, as we have seen, belonged to the aristocratic party at Marseille, Morrel to the plebeian. The first was a royalist, the other suspected of Bonapartism. Villefort looked disdainfully at Morrel and replied coldly, You are aware, monsieur, that a man may be as estimable and trustworthy in private life, and the best seaman in the merchant service, and yet be, politically speaking, a great criminal. Is it not true? The magistrate laid emphasis on these words, as if he wished to apply them to the owner himself, while his eyes seemed to plunge into the heart of one who, interceding for another, had himself need of indulgence. Morrel reddened, for his own conscience was not quite clear on his politics. Besides what Dantès had told him of his interview with the Grand Marshal, and what the Emperor had said to him, He replied, however, in a tone of deep interest. I entreat you, M. de Villefort, be as you always are, kind and equitable, and give him back to us soon. This "give us" sounded revolutionary in the deputy's ears. Ah, murmured he. Is Dante then a member of some Carbonari society, that his protector thus employs the collective form? He was, if I recollect, arrested in a tavern, in company with a great many others. Then he added, Monsieur, you may rest assured I shall perform my duty impartially, and that if he be innocent, you shall not have appealed to me in vain. Should he be, however, guilty, in this present epoch, impunity would furnish a dangerous example, and I must do my duty. As he had now arrived at the door of his own house, which adjoined the Palais de Justice, he entered, after having coldly saluted the shipowner, who stood as if petrified on the spot where Villefort had left him. The antechamber was full of police agents and gendarmes, with the midst of whom, carefully watched, but calm and smiling, stood the prisoner. Villefort traversed the antechamber, cast a side glance at Dante, and taking a packet which the gendarme offered him, disappeared by saying, Bring in the prisoner. Rapid as had been Villefort's glance, it had served to give him an idea of the man he was about to interrogate. He had recognized intelligence in the high forehead, courage in the dark eye and bent brow, and frankness in the thick lips that showed a set of pearly teeth. Villefort's first impression was favorable, but he had been so often warned to mistrust first impulses, that he applied the maxim to the impression, forgetting the difference between the two words. He stifled, therefore, the feelings of compassion that were rising, composed his features, and sat down grim and somber at his desk. An instant after Dante entered, he was pale, but calm and collected, and saluting his judge with easy politeness, looked round for a seat, as if he had been in a Morel's salon. It was then that he encountered for the first time Villefort's look, that look peculiar to the magistrate, who, while seeming to read the thoughts of others, betrays nothing of his own. Who and what are you? Demanded Villefort, turning over a pile of papers, containing information relative to the prisoner that police agent had given him on his entry, and that already in an hour's time had swelled to voluminous proportions, thanks to the corrupt espionage of which the accused is always made the victim. My name is Edmond Dante, replied the young man calmly. I am a maid of the Pharaon, belonging to Messrs. Morel and Son. Your age? Continued Villefort. 19, returned Dante. What were you doing at the moment you were arrested? I was at the festival of my marriage, monsieur, said the young man, his voice slightly tremulous. So great was the contrast between that happy moment and the painful ceremony he was now undergoing. So great was the contrast between the sombre aspect of M. de Villefort and the radiant face of Mercédès. You were at the festival of your marriage, said the deputy, shuddering in spite of himself. Yes, monsieur. I am on the point of marrying a young girl I have been attached to for 3 years. Villefort, impassive as he was struck with this coincidence, and the tremulous voice of Dante, surprised in the midst of his own happiness, struck a sympathetic chord in his own bosom. He was also on the point of being married, and he was summoned from his own happiness to destroy that of another. This philosophic reflection, thought he, will make a great sensation at M. de Saint Méran's, and he arranged mentally, while Dante awaited further questions, the antithesis by which orators create a reputation for eloquence. When this speech was arranged, Villefort returned to Dante. Go on, sir, said he. What would you have me say? Give all the information in your power. Tell me on which point you desire information, and I will tell you all I know. Only, added he with a smile, I warn you, I know. Have you served under the usurper? I was about to be mustered into the Royal Marines when he fell. It is reported your political opinions are extreme, said Villefort, who had never heard anything of the kind, but was not sorry to make this inquiry as if it were an accusation. My political opinions, replied Dante. Alas, sir, I never had any opinions. I am hardly 19. I know nothing. I have no part to play. If I obtain the situation I desire, I shall owe it all to M. Morel. Thus my opinions, I will not say public, but private, are confined to these three sentiments. I love my father, I respect M. Morel, and I adore Mercedes. This, sir, is all I can tell you, and you see how uninteresting it is. As Dante spoke, Villefort gazed at his ingenuous and open countenance, and recollected the words of Renee, who, without knowing who the culprit was, had besought his indulgence for him. With the deputy's knowledge of crime and criminals, every word the young man uttered convinced him more and more of his innocence. This lad, for he was scarcely a man, simple, natural, eloquent, with the eloquence of the heart never found when sought for, full of affection for everybody, because he was happy, and because happiness renders even the wicked good, extended his affection even to the judge. In spite of Villefort's severe look and stern accent, Dante seemed full of kindness. "Pardieu," said Villefort, "he is a noble fellow. I hope I shall gain Renee's favor easily by obeying the first command she ever imposed on me. I shall have at least a pressure of the hand in public, and a sweet kiss in private." Full of this idea, Villefort's face became so joyous that when he turned to Dante, the latter, who had watched the change in his physiognomy, was smiling also. "Sir," said Villefort, "have you any enemies, at least, that you know?" "I have enemies?" replied Dante. "My position is not sufficiently elevated for that. As for my disposition, that is, perhaps, somewhat too hasty, but I have striven to repress it. I have had 10 or 12 sailors under me, and if you question them, they will tell you that they love and respect me, not as a father, for I am too young, but as an elder brother." "But you may have excited jealousy. Were you about to become captain at 19, an elevated post? You are about to marry a pretty girl who loves you, and these two pieces of good fortune may have excited the envy of someone." "You are right. You know men better than I do, and what you say may possibly be the case, I confess. But if such persons are among my acquaintances, I prefer not to know it, because then I should be forced to hate them." "You are wrong. You should always strive to see clearly around you. You seem a worthy young man. I will depart from the strict line of my duty to aid you in discovering the author of this accusation. Here is the paper. Do you know the writing?" As he spoke, Villefort drew the letter from his pocket, and presented it to Dante. Dante read it. A cloud passed over his brow as he said, "No, monsieur, I don't know the writing, and yet it is tolerably plain. Whoever did it writes well. I am very fortunate," added he, looking gratefully to Villefort, "to be examined by such a man as you, for this envious person is a real enemy." And by the rapid glance that the young man's eyes shot forth, Villefort saw how much energy lay hid beneath his mildness. "Now," said the deputy, "answer me frankly, not as a prisoner to a judge, but as one man to another who takes interest in him. What truth is there in the accusation contained in this anonymous letter?" And Villefort threw disdainfully on his desk the letter Dante had just given back to him. "None at all. I will tell you the real facts. I swear by my honor as a sailor, by my love for Mercedes, by the life of my father." "Speak, monsieur," said Villefort. Then internally, if Renee could see me, I hope she would be satisfied, and no longer call me a decapitator. Well, when we quitted Naples, Captain Leclerc was attacked with a brain fever. As we had no doctor on board, he was so anxious to arrive at Elba that he would not touch at any other port. His disorder rose to such a height that at the end of the third day, feeling he was dying, he called me to him. "My dear Dante," said he, "swear to perform what I am going to tell you, for it is a matter of the deepest importance." "I swear, Captain," replied I. "Well, as after my death the command devolves on you as mate, assume the command and bear up for the island of Elba. Disembark at Porto Ferraja. Ask for the Grand Marshal, give him this letter. Perhaps they will give you another letter and charge you with a commission. You will accomplish what I was to have done, and derive all the honor and profit from it." "I will do it, Captain, but perhaps I shall not be admitted to the Grand Marshal's presence as easily as you expect." "Here is a ring that will obtain audience to him, and remove every difficulty," said the captain. At these words he gave me a ring. It was two hours after he was delirious. The next day he died. "And what did you do then?" "What I ought to have done, and what everyone would have done in my place. Everywhere the last requests of a dying man are sacred, but with a sailor the last requests of his superior are commands. I sailed for the island of Elba, where I arrived the next day. I ordered everyone to remain on board and went on shore alone. As I had expected, I found some difficulty in obtaining access to the Grand Marshal, but I sent the ring I had received from the captain to him and was instantly admitted. He questioned me concerning Captain Leclerc's death, and as the latter had told me, gave me a letter to carry on to a person in Paris. I undertook it because it was what my captain had bade me do. I landed here, regulated the affairs of the vessel, and hastened to visit my affianced bride, whom I found more lovely than ever. Thanks to M. Morel, all the forms were got over. In a word, I was, as told you, at my marriage feast, and I should have been married in an hour, and tomorrow I intended to start for Paris, had I not been arrested on this charge, which you as well I see now to be unjust. Ah, said Villefort, this seems to me the truth. If you have been culpable, it was imprudence, and this imprudence was in obedience to the orders of your captain. Give up this letter you have brought from Elba, and pass your word you will appear, should you be required, and go rejoin your friends. I am free then, sir? Cried Dante joyfully. Yes, but first give me this letter. You have it already, for it was taken from me with some other papers which I see in that packet. Stop a moment, said the deputy, as Dante took his hat and gloves. To whom is it addressed? To Monsieur Rue Coqueron, Paris. Had a thunderbolt fallen into the room, Villefort could not have been more stupefied. He sank into his seat and hastily turning over the packet, drew forth the fatal letter, at which he glanced with an expression of terror. M. Noirtier, Rue Coqueron, number 13, murmured he, growing still paler. Yes, said Dante, do you know him? No, replied Villefort, a faithful servant of the king does not know conspirators. It is a conspiracy, then? Asked Dante, who, after believing himself free, now began to feel a tenfold alarm. I have, however, already told you, sir, I was entirely ignorant of the contents of the letter. Yes, but you knew the name of the person to whom it was addressed, said Villefort. I was forced to read the address to know to whom to give it. Have you shown this letter to anyone? Asked Villefort, becoming still more pale. To no one, on my honor. Everybody is ignorant that you are the bearer of a letter from the island of Elba and addressed to M. Noirtier. Everybody except the person who gave it to me. And that was too much, murmured Villefort. Villefort's brow darkened more and more. His white lips and clenched teeth filled Dante with apprehension. After reading the letter, Villefort covered his face with his hands. Oh, said Dante timidly, what is the matter? Villefort made no answer, but raised his head at the expiration of a few seconds, and again perused the letter. And you say you are ignorant of the contents of this letter. I give you my word of honor, sir, said Dante. But what is the matter? You are ill? Shall I ring for assistance? Shall I call? No, said Villefort, rising hastily. Stay where you are. It is for me to give orders here, and not you. Monsieur, replied Dante proudly, it was only to summon assistance for you. I want none. It was a temporary indisposition. Attend to yourself. Answer me. Dante waited, expecting a question, but in vain. Villefort fell back on his chair, passed his hand over his brow, moist with perspiration, and for the third time read the letter. Oh, if he knows the contents of this, murmured he, and that Noirtier is the father of Villefort, I am lost. And he fixed his eyes upon Edmond as if he would have penetrated his thoughts. Oh, it is impossible to doubt it, cried he suddenly. In heaven's name, cried the unhappy young man, if you doubt me, question me, I will answer you. Villefort made a violent effort, and in a tone he strove to render firm. Sir, said he, I am no longer able, as I had hoped, to restore you immediately to liberty. Before doing so, I must consult the trial justice. What my own feelings is you already know. Oh, monsieur, cried Dante, you have been rather a friend than a judge. Well, I must detain you some time longer, but I will strive to make it as short as possible. The principal charge against you is this letter, and you see, Villefort approached the fire, cast it in, and waited until it was entirely consumed. You see, I destroy it. Oh, exclaimed Dante, you are goodness itself. Listen, continued Villefort, as you can now have confidence in me after what I have done. Oh, command, and I will obey. Listen, this is not a command, but advice I give you. Speak, and I will follow your advice. I shall detain you until this evening in the Palais de Justice. Should anyone else interrogate you, say to him what you have said to me, but do not breathe a word of this letter. I promise. It was Villefort who seemed to entreat, and the prisoner who reassured him. You see, continued he, glancing in toward the grate, where fragments of burnt paper fluttered in the flames, the letter is destroyed. You and I alone know of its existence. Should you therefore be questioned, deny all knowledge of it. Deny it boldly, and you are saved. Be satisfied, I will deny it. It was the only letter you had? It was. Swear it. I swear it. Villefort rang. A police agent entered. Villefort whispered some words in his ear, to which the officer replied by a motion of his head. Follow him, said Villefort to Dante. Dante saluted Villefort and retired. Hardly had the door closed when Villefort threw himself half-fainting into a chair. Alas, alas, murmured he. If the procureur himself had been at Marseilles, I should have been ruined. This accursed letter would have destroyed all my hopes. Oh, my father, must your past career always interfere with my successes? Suddenly a light passed over his face. A smile played round his set mouth, and his haggard eyes were fixed in thought. This will do, he said. From this letter, which might have ruined me, I will make my fortune. Now to the work I have in hand. And after having assured himself that the prisoner was gone, the deputy procureur hastened to the house of his betrothed. Chapter 8. The Chateau d'If. The commissary of police, as he traversed the antechamber, made a sign to two gendarmes, who placed themselves one on Dante's right and the other on his left. A door that communicated with the Palais de Justice was opened, and they went through a long range of gloomy corridors, whose appearance might have made even the boldest shudder. The Palais de Justice communicated with the prison, a sombre edifice that from its grated windows looks on the clock tower of the Achilles. After numberless windings, Dante saw a door with an iron wicket. The commissary took up an iron mallet and knocked thrice, every blow seeming to Dante as if it struck on his heart. The door opened, and the two gendarmes gently pushed him forward, and the door closed with a loud sound behind him. The air he inhaled was no longer pure, but thick and mephitic. He was in prison. He was conducted to a tolerably neat chamber, but grated and barred, and its appearance therefore did not greatly alarm him. Besides, the words of Villefort, who seemed in earnest himself so much, resounded still in his ears like a promise of freedom. It was 4 o'clock when Dante was placed in this chamber. It was, as we have said, the 1st of March, and the prisoner was soon buried in darkness. The obscurity augmented the acuteness of his hearing. At the slightest sound he rose and hastened to the door, convinced they were about to liberate him. But the sound died away, and Dante sank again into his seat. At last, about 10 o'clock, and just as Dante began to despair, steps were heard in the corridor. A key turned in the lock, the bolts creaked, the massy oaken door flew open, and a flood of light from the 2 torches pervaded the apartment. By the torchlight, Dante saw the glittering sabers and carbines of 4 gendarmes. He had advanced at first, but stopped at the sight of this display of force. "Are you come to fetch me?" asked he. "Yes," replied a gendarme. "By the orders of the deputy procureur?" "I believe so." The conviction that they came from M. de Villefort relieved all Dante's apprehensions. He advanced calmly and placed himself in the center of the escort. A carriage waited at the door. The coachman was on the box, and a police officer sat beside him. "Is this carriage for me?" said Dante. "It is for you," replied a gendarme. Dante was about to speak, but feeling himself urged forward, and having neither the power nor the intention to resist, he mounted the steps, and was in an instant seated inside between 2 gendarmes. The 2 others took their places opposite, and the carriage rolled heavily over the stones. The prisoner glanced at the windows. They were grated. He had changed his prison for another that was conveying him he knew not whither. Through the grating, however, Dante saw they were passing through the Rue Cassari, and by the Rue Saint-Laurent and the Rue Taramis to the quay. Soon he saw the lights of La Consigne. The carriage stopped. The officer descended, approached the guardhouse. A dozen soldiers came out and formed themselves in order. Dante saw the reflection of their muskets by light of the lamps on the quay. Can all this force be summoned on my account? Thought he. The officer opened the door, which was locked, and without speaking a word answered Dante's question, for he saw between the ranks of the soldiers a passage formed from the carriage to the port. These two gendarmes who were opposite to him descended first. Then he was ordered to alight, and the gendarmes on each side of him followed his example. They advanced toward a boat, which a custom-house officer held by a chain near the quay. The soldiers looked at Dante with an air of stupid curiosity. In an instant he was placed in the stern sheets of the boat, between the gendarmes, while the officer stationed himself at the bow. A shove sent the boat adrift, and 4 sturdy oarsmen impelled it rapidly towards the pylon. A shout from the boat. The chain that closes the mouth of the port was lowered, and in a second they were, as Dante knew, in the Freirum, and outside the inner harbor. The prisoner's first feeling was of joy at again breathing the pure air, for air is freedom. But he soon sighed, for he passed the La Reserve, where he had that morning been so happy, and now through the open windows came the laughter and revelry of a ball. Dante folded his hands, raised his eyes to heaven, and prayed fervently. The boat continued her voyage. They had passed the Tête de Mort, and were now off the Anse de Phare, and were about to double the battery. This maneuver was incomprehensible to Dante. "Whither are you taking me?" asked he. "You will, but still, we are forbidden to give you any explanation." Dante, trained in discipline, knew that nothing would be more absurd than to question subordinates who were forbidden to reply, so he remained silent. The most vague and wild thoughts passed through his mind. The boat they were in could not make a long voyage. There was no vessel at anchor outside the harbor. He thought perhaps they were going to leave him on some distant point. He was not bound, nor had they made any attempt to handcuff him. This seemed a good augury. Besides, he had not the deputy, who had been so kind to him, told him that provided he did not pronounce the dreaded name of Nordier, that he had nothing to apprehend? Had not Villefort in his presence destroyed the fatal letter, the only proof against him? He waited silently, striving to pierce through the darkness. They had left the Il Ratonneau, where the lighthouse stood, on the right, and were now opposite the Point des Catalans. It seemed to the prisoner that he could distinguish a feminine form on the beach, for it was there Mercédès dwelt. How was it the presentiment did not warn Mercédès that her lover was within 300 yards of her? One light alone was visible, and Dante saw that it came from Mercédès' chamber. Mercédès was the only one awake in the whole settlement. A loud cry could be heard by her, but pride restrained him and he did not utter it. What would his guards think if they heard him shout like a madman? He remained silent, his eyes fixed upon the light. The boat went on, but the prisoner thought only of Mercédès. An intervening elevation of land hid the light. Dante turned and perceived that they had got out to sea. While he had been absorbed in thought, they had shipped their oars and hoisted sail. The boat was now moving with the wind. In spite of his repugnance to address the guards, Dante turned to the nearest gendarme, and taking his hand, "Comrade," said he, "I adjure you, as a Christian and a soldier, to tell me where we are going. I am Captain Dante, a loyal Frenchman, thought accused of treason. Tell me where you are conducting me, and I promise you on my honor I will submit to my fate." The gendarme looked irresolutely at his companion, who returned for answer a sign that said, "I see no great harm in telling him now." And the gendarme replied, "You are a native of Marseille and a sailor, and yet you do not know where you are going? On my honor, I have no idea." "Have you no idea whatever?" "None at all." "That is impossible." "I swear to you it is true. Tell me, I entreat." "But my orders." "Your orders do not forbid You're telling me what I must know in 10 minutes, in half an hour, or in an hour. You see, I cannot escape, even if I intended. Unless you are blind or have never been outside the harbor, you must know. I do not. Look round you, then. Dante rose and looked forward, when he saw rise within 100 yards of him the black and frowning rock on which stands the Chateau d'If, this gloomy fortress which has for more than 300 years furnished food for so many wild legends, seemed to Dante like a scaffold to a malefactor. The Chateau d'If, he cried. What are we going there for? The gendarme smiled. I am not going to be imprisoned, said Dante. That is only used for political prisoners. I have committed no crime. Are there any magistrates or judges at the Chateau d'If? There are only, said the gendarme, a governor, a garrison, turnkeys, and good thick walls. Come, come, do not look so astonished, or you will make me think you are laughing at me in return for my good nature. Dante pressed the gendarme's hand as though he would crush it. You think, then, said he, that I am taken to the Chateau d'If to be imprisoned there? It is probable, but there is no occasion to squeeze so hard. Without any inquiry, without any formality? All the formalities have been gone through, the inquiry was already made. And so, in spite of M. de Villefort's promises? I do not know what M. de Villefort promised you, said the gendarme, but I know we are taking you to the Chateau d'If. But what are you doing? Help, comrades, help. By a rapid movement, which the gendarme's practiced eye had perceived, Dante sprang forward to precipitate himself into the sea. But 4 vigorous arms seized him. As his feet quitted the bottom of the boat, he fell back cursing with rage. Good, said the gendarme, placing his knee on his chest. This is the way you keep your word as a sailor? Believe soft-spoken gentlemen again. Hark ye, my friend, I have disobeyed my first order, but I will not disobey the second, and if you move, I will blow your brains out. And he leveled his carbine at Dante, who felt the muzzle against his temple. For a moment the idea of struggling crossed his mind, and of so ending the unexpected evil that had overtaken him. But he bethought of M. de Villefort's promise, and besides, death in a boat from the hand of a gendarme seemed too terrible. He remained motionless, but gnashing his teeth and wringing his hands with fury. At this moment the boat came to a landing with a violent shock. One of the sailors leaped on shore. A cord creaked as it ran through a pulley, and Dante guessed that they were at the end of the voyage, that they were mooring the boat. His guards, taking him by the arms and coat collar, forced him to rise, and dragged him towards the steps that led to the gate of the fortress, while the police officer carrying a musket with a fixed bayonet followed behind. Dante made no resistance. He was like a man in a dream. He saw soldiers drawn up on the embankment. He knew vaguely that he was descending a flight of steps. He was conscious that he passed through a door, and that the door closed behind him. But all this indistinctly as though a mist. He did not even see the ocean, that terrible barrier against freedom, which the prisoners look upon with utter despair. They halted for a moment, during which he strove to collect his thoughts. He looked around. He was in a court surrounded by high walls. He heard the measured tread of sentinels. As they passed before the light, he saw the barrels of their muskets shine. They waited upwards of 10 minutes. Certain Dante could not escape, the gendarmes released him. They seemed awaiting orders. The orders came. Where is the prisoner? Said a voice. Here, replied the gendarmes. Let him follow me. I will take him to his cell. Go, said the gendarmes, thrusting Dante forward. The prisoner followed his guide, who led him into a room almost underground, whose bare and reeking walls seemed as though impregnated with tears. A lamp placed on a stool illuminated the apartment faintly, and showed Dante the features of his conductor, an under-jailer, ill-clothed and sullen appearance. Here is your chamber for tonight, said he. It is late, and the governor is asleep. Tomorrow, perhaps, he may change you. In the meantime, there is water and fresh straw, and that is all a prisoner can wish for. Good night. And before Dante could open his mouth, before he had noticed where the jailer placed his bread or the water, he had glanced towards the corner where the straw was. The jailer disappeared, taking with him the lamp and closing the door, leaving stamped upon the prisoner's mind the dim reflection of the dripping walls of his dungeon. Dante was alone in darkness and in silence. cold as the shadows that he felt breathe on his burning forehead. With the first dawn of the day, the jailer returned, with orders to leave Dante where he was. He found the prisoner in the same position, as if fixed there, his eyes swollen with weeping. He had passed the night standing and without sleep. The jailer advanced. Dante appeared not to perceive him. He touched him on the shoulder. Edmund startled. "Have you not slept?" said the jailer. "I do not know," replied Dante. The jailer stared. "Are you hungry?" continued he. "I do not know." "Do you wish for anything?" "I wish to see the governor." The jailer shrugged his shoulders and left the chamber. Dante followed him with his eyes and stretched forth his hands towards the open door, but the door closed. All his emotion then burst forth. He cast himself on the ground, weeping bitterly, and asking himself what crime he had committed that he was thus punished. The day passed thus. He scarcely tasted food, but walked round and round the cell like a wild beast in its cage. One thought in particular tormented him, namely that during his journey hither he had sat so still, whereas he might a dozen times have plunged into the sea, and thanks to his powers of swimming, for which he was famous, have gained the shore, concealed himself until the arrival of a Genoese or Spanish vessel, escaped to Spain or Italy, where Mercedes and his father could have joined him. He had no fears as to how he should live. Good seamen are welcome everywhere. He spoke Italian like a Tuscan and Spanish like a Castilian. He would have been free and happy with Mercedes and his father, whereas he was now confined in the Chateau d'If, the impregnable fortress, ignorant of the future destiny of his father and Mercedes, and all this because he had trusted to Villefort's promise. The thought was maddening, and Dante threw himself furiously down on the straw. The next morning, at the same hour, the jailer came again. "Well," said the jailer, "are you more reasonable today?" Dante made no reply. "Come, cheer up. Is there anything that I can do for you?" "I wish to see the governor." "I have already told you it is impossible." "Why so?" "Because it is against prison rules, and prisoners must not even ask for it." "What is allowed, then?" "Better fare, if you pay for it, books, and leave to walk about." "I do not want books. I am satisfied with my food, and I do not care to walk about. I wish to see the governor." "If you worry me by repeating the same thing, I will not bring you any more to eat." "Well then," said Edmund, "if you do not, I shall die of hunger, that is all." The jailer saw by his tone he would be happy to die, and as every prisoner is worth 10 sous a day to his jailer, he replied in a more subdued tone, "What you ask is impossible, but if you are very well behaved, you will be allowed to walk about, and some day you will meet the governor, and if he chooses to reply, that is his affair." "But how long shall I have to wait?" "A month, 6 months, a year." "It is too long a time. I wish to see him at once." "Ah," said the jailer, "do not always brood over what is impossible, or you will be mad in a fortnight." "You think so?" "Yes, we have an instance here. It was by always offering 1,000,000 francs to the governor for his liberty that an abbé became mad who was in this chamber before you." "How long has he left in it?" "2 years." "Was he liberated then?" "No, he was put in a dungeon." "Listen," said Dante, "I am not an abbé. I am not mad. Perhaps I shall be, but at present, unfortunately, I am not. I will make you another offer." "What is that?" "I do not offer you 1,000,000 because I have it not, but I will give you 100 crowns if, the first time you go to Marseilles, you will seek out a young girl named Mercedes at the Catalans and give her 2 lines from me. If I took them and were detected, I should lose my place, which is worth 2,000 francs a year, so that I should be a great fool to run such a risk for 300. "Well," said Dante, "mark this. If you refuse at least to tell Mercedes I am here, I will some day hide myself behind the door, and when you enter I will dash out your brains with this stool." "Threats!" cried the jailer, retreating and putting himself on the defensive. "You are certainly going mad. The abbé began like you, and in 3 days you will be like him, mad enough to tie up, but fortunately there are dungeons here." Dante whirled the stool round his head. All right," said the jailer. "All right, since you will have it so, I will send word to the governor." "Very well," returned Dante, dropping the stool and sitting on it as if he were in reality mad. The jailer went out, and returned in an instant with a corporal and 4 soldiers. "By the governor's order," said he, "conduct the prisoner to the tier beneath." "To the dungeon, then," said the corporal. Yes, we must put the madman with the madmen. The soldiers seized Dante, who was followed passively. He descended 15 steps, and the door of the dungeon was opened, and he was thrust in. The door closed, and Dante advanced with outstretched hands until he touched the wall. He sat down in the corner until his eyes became accustomed to the darkness. The jailer was right. Dante wanted but little of utterly being mad. Chapter 9. The evening of the betrothal. Villefort had, as we have said, hastened back to the Madame de Saint Méran's in the Place du Grand Cours, and on entering the house found that the guests whom he had left at the table were taking coffee in the salon. Renée was, with all the rest of the company, anxiously awaiting him, and his entrance was followed by a general exclamation. "Well, decapitator, guardian of the state, royalist, Brutus, what is the matter?" said one. "Speak out." "Are we threatened with a fresh reign of terror?" asked another. "Has the Corsican ogre broken loose?" cried a third. "Marquise," said Villefort, approaching his future mother-in-law, "I request your pardon for thus leaving you. Will the Marquis honour me by a few moments' private conversation?" "Ah, it is really a serious matter, then?" asked the Marquis, remarking the cloud on Villefort's brow. "So serious that I must take leave of you for a few days, so," added he, returning to Renée, "judge for yourself if it be not important." "You are going to leave us?" cried Renée, unable to hide her emotion at this unexpected announcement. "Alas," returned Villefort, "I must." "Where, then, are you going?" asked the Marquise. "That, madame, is an official secret. But if you have any commissions for Paris, a friend of mine is going there tonight, and will with pleasure undertake them." The guests looked at each other. "You wish to speak to me alone?" said the Marquis. "Yes, let us go to the library, please." The Marquis took his arm, and they left the salon. "Well," asked he, as soon as they were by themselves, "tell me what it is." "An affair of the greatest importance that demands my immediate presence in Paris. Now excuse the indiscretion, Marquis, but have you any landed property?" "All my fortune is in the funds, 700,000 or 800,000 francs." "Then sell out, Marquis, or you will lose it all." "But how can I sell out here?" "You have a broker, have you not?" "Yes." "Then give me a letter to him, and tell him to sell out without an instant's delay. Perhaps even now I shall arrive too late." "The deuce you say," replied the Marquis. "Let us lose no time, then." And sitting down, he wrote a letter to his broker, ordering him to sell out at the market price. "Now then," said Villefort, placing the letter in his pocket-book, "I must have another." "To whom?" "To the king." "To the king?" "Yes. I dare not write to his majesty." "I do not ask you to write to his majesty, but to ask M. de Salvieux to do so. I want a letter that will enable me to reach the king's presence without all the formalities of demanding an audience, that would occasion a loss of precious time. But address yourself to the keeper of the seals. He has the right of entry at the Tuileries, and can procure you audience at any hour of the day or night." "Doubtless, but there is no occasion to divide the honours of my discovery with him. The keeper would leave me in the background and take all the glory to himself. I tell you, Marquis, my fortune is made if only I reach the Tuileries the first, for the king will not forget the service I do him." "In that case, go and get ready. I will call Salvieux and make him write the letter. Be as quick as possible. I must be on the road in quarter of an hour. Tell your coachman to stop at the door. You will present my excuses to the Marquise and the Mademoiselle Renée, whom I leave on such a day with great regret. You will find them both here, and can make your farewells in person. A thousand thanks. And now for the letter." The Marquis rang. A servant entered. "Say to the Comte de Salvieux that I would like to see him." "Now then, go," said the Marquis. "I shall be gone only a few minutes." Villefort hastily quitted the apartment, but reflecting that the sight of the deputy procureur running through the streets would be enough to throw the whole city into confusion, he resumed his ordinary pace. At his door he perceived a figure in the shadow that seemed to wait for him. It was Mercédès, who, hearing no news of her lover, had come unobserved to inquire after him. As Villefort drew near, she advanced and stood before him. Dante had spoken of Mercedes, and Villefort instantly recognized her. Her beauty and high bearing surprised him, and when she inquired what had become of her lover, it seemed to him that she was the judge and he the accused. "The young man you speak of," said Villefort abruptly, "is a great criminal, and I can do nothing for him, mademoiselle." Mercédès burst into tears, and, as Villefort strove to pass her, again addressed him. "But at least tell me where is he, that I may know whether he is alive or dead," she said. "I do not know, he is no longer in my hands," replied Villefort. And desirous of putting an end to the interview, he pushed by her, and closed the door as if to exclude the pain he felt. But remorse is not thus banished. Like Virgil's wounded hero, he carried the arrow in his wound, and arrived at the salon. Villefort uttered a sigh that was almost a sob, and sank into a chair. Then the first pangs of an unending torture seized upon his heart. The man he sacrificed to his ambition, that innocent victim immolated on the altar of his father's faults, appeared to him pale and threatening, leading his affianced bride by the hand, and bringing with him remorse, not such as the ancients figured furious and terrible, but that slow and consuming agony whose pains are intensified from hour to hour up to the very moment of death. Then he had a moment's hesitation. He had frequently called for capital punishments on criminals, and owing to his irresistible eloquence they had been condemned, and yet the slightest shadow of remorse had never clouded Villefort's brow, because they were guilty, at least he believed so. But here was an innocent man whose happiness he had just destroyed. In this case he was not the judge, but the executioner. And he thus reflected, he felt the sensation we have described, and which had hitherto been unknown to him, arise in his bosom and fill him with vague apprehensions. It is thus that a wounded man trembles instinctively at the approach of the finger to his wound, until it be healed. But Villefort's was one of those that will never close, or if they do, only close to reopen more agonizing than ever. If at this moment the sweet voice of Renée had sounded in his ears pleading for mercy, or the fair Mercédès had entered and said, "In the name of God I conjure you to restore me my affianced husband," his cold and trembling hands would have signed his release. But no voice broke the stillness of the chamber, and the door was opened only by Villefort's valet, who came to tell him that the traveling carriage was in readiness. Villefort rose, or rather sprang from his chair, hastily opened the drawers of his desk, emptied all the gold it contained into his pocket, stood motionless in an instant, his hand pressed to his head, muttered a few inarticulate sounds, and then perceiving that his servant had placed his cloak on his shoulders, he sprang into the carriage, ordering the postilions to drive to M. de Saint-Méran. The hapless Dante was doomed. As the Marquis had promised, Villefort found the Marquise and Renée in waiting. He started when he saw Renée, for he fancied she was again about to plead for Dante. Alas, her emotions were wholly personal. She was thinking only of Villefort's departure. She loved Villefort, and he left her at the moment he was about to become her husband. Villefort knew not when he and Renée, far from pleading for Dante, hated the man whose crimes separated her from her lover. Meanwhile, what of Mercédès? She had met Fernand at the corner of the Rue de l'Aube. She had returned to the Catalans and had despairingly cast herself on the couch. Fernand, kneeling by her side, took her hand and covered it with kisses that Mercédès did not even feel. She passed the night thus. The lamp went out for want of oil, but she paid no heed to the darkness. And dawn came, but she knew not that it was day. Grief had made her blind to all but one object, that was Edmund. "Ah, you are there," she said, at length turning towards Fernand. "I have not quitted you since yesterday," returned Fernand sorrowfully. And Morel had given up. He had learned that Dante had been taken to prison, and he had gone to all his friends and the influential persons of the city. But the report was already in circulation that Dante was arrested as a Bonapartist agent, and as the most sanguine looked upon any attempt of Napoleon to remount the throne as impossible. He met with nothing but refusal. and had returned home in despair, declaring that the matter was serious and that nothing more could be done. Pater was equally restless and uneasy, but instead of seeking, like a Morel, to aid Dante, he had shut himself up with 2 bottles of black currant brandy in the hope of drowning reflection. But he did not succeed, and became too intoxicated to fetch any more drink, and yet not so intoxicated as to forget what had happened. With his elbows on the table, he sat between the 2 empty bottles, while spectres danced in the light of the unsnuffed candle, spectres such as the Hoffman strews over his punch-drenched pages like black, fantastic dust. Danglars alone was content and joyous. He had got rid of an enemy, and made his own situation on the Pharaon secure. Danglars was one of those born with a pen behind the ear, and an inkstand in place of the heart. Everything with him was multiplication or subtraction. The life of a man was to him far less value than a numeral, especially when by taking it away he could increase the sum total of his own desires. He went to bed at and slept in peace. Villefort, having received Andesavi's letter, embraced Renée, kissed the Marquis's hand, and shaken that of the Marquis, started for Paris along the Aix road. Old Dante was dying with anxiety to know what had become of Edmund, but we know very well what had become of Edmund. Chapter 10. The King's Closet at Tuileries. We will leave on the road to Paris, traveling thanks to troubled fees with all speed, and passing through 2 or 3 apartments, enter at the Tuileries the little room with the arched window, so well known as having been the favorite closet of Napoleon and Louis XVIII, and now of Louis Philippe. There, seated before a walnut table he had brought with him from Hartwell, and to which, from one of those fancies not uncommon to great people, he was particularly attached, the King Louis XVIII was carelessly listening to a man of 50 or 52 years of age, with grey hair, aristocratic bearing, and exceedingly gentlemanly attire, and meanwhile making a marginal note in a volume of Geffr's rather inaccurate but much sought-after edition of Horace, a work which was much indebted to the sagacious observations of the philosophical monarch. "You say, sir," said the king, "that I am exceedingly disquieted, sire. Really, have you had a vision of the 7 fat kine and the 7 lean kine?" "No, sire, for that would only betoken for us 7 years of plenty and 7 years of scarcity. And with a king as full of foresight as your majesty, scarcity is not a thing to be feared." "Then of what other scourge are you afraid, my dear Blackus?" "Sire, I have every reason to believe that a storm is brewing in the south." "Well, my dear Duke," replied Louis XVIII, "I think you are wrongly informed, and know positively that on the contrary it is very fine weather in that direction." Man of ability as he was, Louis XVIII liked a pleasant jest. "Sire," continued the Blackus, "if it only be to reassure a faithful servant, will your majesty send into Languedoc province and Dauphine trusty men who will bring back a faithful report as to the feelings in these 3 provinces?" "Canimus certus," replied the king, continuing the annotations in his Horace. "Sire," replied the courtier, laughing, in order that he might seem to comprehend the quotation, "your majesty may be perfectly right in relying on the good feeling of France, but I fear I am not altogether wrong in dreading some desperate attempt." "By whom?" "By Bonaparte, or at least by his adherents." "My dear Blackus," said the king, "you with your alarms prevent me from working, and you, sire, prevent me from sleeping with your security. Wait, my dear sir, wait a moment, for I have such a delightful note on the Pastor Quamterit. Wait, and I will listen to you afterwards." There was a brief pause, during which Louis XVIII wrote in a hand as small as possible another note on the margin of his Horace, and then looking at the Duke with an air of a man who thinks he has an idea of his own, while he is only commenting upon the idea of another, said, "Go on, my dear Duke, go on, I listen." "Sire," said Blackus, who had for a moment the hope of sacrificing Villefort to his own profit, I am compelled to tell you that these are not mere rumors destitute of foundation, which thus disquiet me, but a serious-minded man deserving all my confidence, and charged by me to watch over the South. The Duke hesitated as he pronounced these words. Has arrived by post to tell me that a great peril threatens the king, and so I hasten to you, sire. Maleducus avi dominum, continued Louis, still annotating. Does your majesty wish me to drop the subject? By no means, my dear Duke, but just stretch out your hand. Whichever you please, there, to the left. Here, sire? I tell you to the left, and you are looking to the right. I mean on my left. Yes, there. You will find yesterday's report of the Minister of Police. But here is M. d'André himself. And M. d'André, announced by the chamberlain in waiting, entered. Come, said Louis XVIII, with a repressed smile. Come in, Baron, and tell the Duke all you know. The latest news of M. de Bonaparte. Do not conceal anything, however serious. Let us see, the island of Elba is a volcano, and we may expect to have issuing thence flaming and bristling war. Bella horrida bella. M. d'André leaned respectfully on the back of a chair with his two hands and said, Has your majesty perused yesterday's report? Yes, but tell the Duke himself, who cannot find anything, what the report contains. Give him the particulars of what the usurper is doing in his islet. Monsieur, said the Baron to the Duke, all the servants of his majesty must approve of the latest intelligence which we have from the island of Elba. Bonaparte. M. d'André looked at Louis XVIII, who employed in writing a note, did not even raise his head. Bonaparte, continued the Baron, is mortally weary, and passes whole days in watching his miners at work in Portolong. And scratches himself for amusement, added the king. Scratches himself, inquired the Duke. What does your majesty mean? Yes, indeed, my dear Duke. Did you forget that this great man, this hero, this demigod, is attacked with a malady of the skin which worries him to death? Purigo? And moreover, my dear Duke, continued the minister of police, we are almost assured that in a very short time the usurper will be insane. Insane? Raving mad, his head becomes weaker. Sometimes he weeps bitterly, sometimes laughs boisterously. At other times he passes hours on the seashore, flinging stones in the water, and when the flint makes duck and drake, 5 or 6 times he appears as delighted as if he had gained another Marengo or Austerlitz. Now you must agree that these indubitable symptoms of insanity, or of wisdom, my dear Baron, or of wisdom, said Louis, laughing. The greatest captains of antiquity amused themselves by casting pebbles into the ocean. See Plutarch's Life Scipii Africanus. And the Blackus pondered deeply between the confident monarch and the truthful minister. Villefort, who did not choose to reveal the whole secret, lest another should reap all the benefit of the disclosure, had yet communicated enough to him to cause the greatest uneasiness. Well, d'André, said Louis, Blackus is not yet convinced. Let us proceed, therefore, to the usurper's conversion. The minister of police bowed. The usurper's conversion, murmured the Duke, looking at the king and d'André, who spoke alternately like Virgil's shepherds. The usurper converted. Decidedly, my dear Duke. In what way converted? To good principles. Tell him about it, Baron. Why, this is the way of it, said the minister, with the gravest air in the world. Napoleon lately had a review, and as 2 or 3 of his old veterans expressed a desire to return to France, he gave them their dismissal, and exhorted them to serve the good king. Those were his words. Of that I am certain. Well, Blackus, what do you think of this? Inquired the king triumphantly, and pausing for a moment from the voluminous scholiast before him. I say, sire, that the minister of police is greatly deceived, or I am, and as it is possible it can be the minister of police, as he has the guardianship of the safety and honor of your majesty, it is probable that I am in error. However, sire, if I might advise, your majesty will interrogate the person of whom I spoke to you, and I will urge your majesty to do him this honor. Most willingly, Duke. Under your auspices I will receive any person you please, but you must not expect me to be too confiding. Baron, have you any report more recent than this, dated the 20th of February, and this is the 3rd of March? No, sire, but I am hourly expecting one. It may have arrived since I left my office. No, sire, but go thither, and if there be none, well, continued Louis, make one. That is the usual way, is it not? And the king laughed facetiously. Oh, sire, replied the minister, we have no occasion to invent any. Every day our desks are loaded with most circumstantial denunciations, coming from hosts of people who hope for some return for services which they seek to render, but cannot. They trust to fortune and rely upon some unexpected event in some way to justify their predictions. Well, sir, go, said Louis, and remember that I am waiting for you. I will go and return, sire, but I will be back in 10 minutes. And I, sire, M. de Blacas said, will go and find my messenger. Wait, sir, wait, said Louis. Really, M. de Blacas, I must change your armorial bearings. I will give you an eagle with outstretched wings, holding in its claw a prey, which tries in vain to escape, and bearing this device, tenax. Sire, I listen, said de Blacas, biting his nails with impatience. I wish to consult you on this passage, Male fugens annihilitu. You know it refers to a stag flying from a wolf. Are you not a sportsman and no great wolf hunter? Well then, what do you think of the Male annihilitu? Admirable, sire, but my messenger is like the stag you refer to, for he has posted 220 leagues in scarcely 3 days, which is undergoing great fatigue and anxiety, my dear Duke, when we have a telegraph which transmits messages in 3 or 4 hours, and that without getting in the least out of breath. Ah, sire, you recompensed it but badly this poor young man, who has come so far, and with so much ardor, to give your majesty useful information, if only for the sake of M. de Salvieux, who recommends him to me. I entreat your majesty to receive him graciously. M. de Salvieux, my brother's chamberlain? Yes, sire, he is at Marseilles, and he writes me thence. Does he speak to you of this conspiracy? No, but strongly recommends M. de Villefort, and begs me to present him to your majesty. M. de Villefort, cried the king. Is this the messenger's name, Villefort? Yes, sire, and he comes from Marseilles? In person. Why did you not mention his name at once? Replied the king, betraying some uneasiness. Sire, I thought his name was unknown to your majesty. No, not Blacas. He is a man of strong and elevated understanding, ambitious too, and pardieu, you know his father's name? His father? Yes, Nordier. Nordier the Girondin? Nordier the senator? He himself. And your majesty has employed the son of such a man? Blacas, my friend, you have but limited comprehension. I told you Villefort was ambitious, and to attain this ambition Villefort would sacrifice everything, even his father. Then, sire, may I present him? This instant, Duke, where is he? Waiting below in my carriage? Seek him at once. I hasten to do so. The Duke left the royal presence with the speed of a young man. His really sincere royalism made him youthful again. Louis remained alone, and turned his eyes on his half-opened horse, and muttered, Justum et tenacem props virum. M. de Blacas returned as speedily as he had departed, but in the antechamber he was forced to appeal to the king's authority. Villefort's dusty garb, his costume, which was courtly cut, excited the susceptibility of M. de Brézé, who was all astonished at finding this young man in the audacity to enter before the king in such attire. The Duke, however, overcame all difficulties with a word, His Majesty's order, and in spite of the protestations which the master of ceremonies made for the honor of his office and principles, Villefort was introduced. The king was seated in the same place where the Duke had left him. On opening the door, Villefort found himself facing him, and the young magistrate's first impulse was to pause. Come in, Villefort, said the king, come in. Villefort bowed, and advancing a few steps, waited until the king should interrogate him. Villefort, said Louis, the Duc de Blacas assures me you have some interesting information to communicate. Sire, the Duke is right, and I believe your Majesty will think it equally important. In the first place, and before everything else, sire, is the news as bad in your opinion as I am asked to believe? Sire, I believe it is to be the most urgent, but I hope by the speed I have used that it is not irreparable. Speak as fully as you please, sir, said the king, who began to give way to the emotion that which had showed itself in Blocka's face and affected Villefort's voice. Speak, sir, and pray begin at the beginning. I like order in it. Sire, said Villefort, I will render a faithful report to your majesty, but I must entreat your forgiveness if my anxiety leads to some obscurity in my language. A glance at the king after this discreet and subtle exordium assured Villefort of the benignity of his august auditor, and he went on. Sire, I have come as rapidly to Paris as possible, to inform your majesty that I have discovered, in the exercise of my duties, not a commonplace and insignificant plot, such as is every day got up in the lower ranks of the people and in the army, but an actual conspiracy, a storm which menaces no less than your majesty. Sire, the usurper is arming 3 ships. He meditates some project, which, however mad, is yet perhaps terrible. At this moment he will have left Elba to go whither I know not, but assuredly to attempt a landing either at Naples, or on the coast of Tuscany, or perhaps the shore of France. Your majesty is well aware that the sovereign of the island of Elba has maintained his relations with Italy and France? I am, sir, said the king, much agitated, and recently we have had information that the Bonapartist clubs have met in the Rue Saint-Jacques. But proceed, I beg of you. How did you obtain these details? Sire, they are results of an examination which I have made of a man of Marseille, whom I have watched for some time and arrested on the day of my departure. This person, a sailor of turbulent character, and whom I suspected of Bonapartism, has been secretly to the island of Elba. There he saw the Grand Marshal, who charged him with an oral message to a Bonapartist in Paris, whose name I could not extract from him. But this message was to prepare men's mind for a return. It is the man who says this, sire. A return which will soon occur. And where is this man? In prison, sire. And the matter seems serious to you? So serious, sire, that when the circumstance surprised me in the midst of a family festival, on the very day of my betrothal, I left my bride and friends, postponing everything that I might hasten to lay at your majesty's feet the fears which impressed me, and the assurance of my devotion. True, said Louis. There was not a marriage engagement between you and Mademoiselle de Saint Méran, daughter of one of your majesty's most faithful servants. Yes, yes, but let us talk of this plot, M. de Villefort. Sire, I fear it is more than a plot. I fear it is a conspiracy. A conspiracy in these times, said Louis, smiling, is a thing very easy to mediate, but more difficult to conduct to an end, inasmuch as, re-established so recently on the throne of our ancestors, we have our eyes open at once upon the past, the present, and the future. For the last 10 months, my ministers have redoubled their vigilance, in order to watch the shore of the Mediterranean. If Bonaparte landed at Naples, the whole coalition would be on foot before he could even reach Pimombino. If he landed in Tuscany, he will be in an unfriendly territory. If he land in France, it must be with a handful of men, and the result of that is easily foretold, execrated as he is by the population. Take courage, sir, but at the same time rely on our royal gratitude. And here is D'Andre, cried de Blocas. At this instant the minister of police appeared at the door, pale, trembling, and as if ready to faint. Villefort was about to retire, but M. de Blocas, taking his hand, restrained him. Chapter 11. The Corsican Ogre. At the sight of this agitation, Louis XVIII pushed from him violently the table at which he was sitting. "What ails you, Baron?" he exclaimed. "You appear quite aghast. Has your uneasiness anything to do with what M. de Blacas has told me, and M. de Villefort has just confirmed?" M. de Blacas moved suddenly towards the Baron, but the fright of the courtier pleaded for the forbearance of the statesman. And besides, as matters were, it was much more to his advantage that the prefect of police should triumph over him than that he should humiliate the prefect. "Sire," stammered the Baron. "Well, what is it?" asked Louis. The Minister of Police, giving way to an impulse of despair, was about to throw himself at the feet of Louis XVIII, who retreated a step and frowned. "Will you speak?" he said. "Oh, sire, what a dreadful misfortune! I am indeed to be pitied. I can never forgive myself." "Monsieur," said Louis, "I command you to speak." "Well, sire, the usurper left Elba on the 26th of February and landed on the 1st of March." "And where? In Italy?" asked the king eagerly. "In France, sire, at a small port near Antibes in the Gulf of Juan." "The usurper landed in France, near Antibes in the Gulf of Juan, 250 leagues from Paris, on the 1st of March, and you only acquired this information today, the 3rd of March? Well, sir, what you tell me is impossible. You must have received a false report, or you have gone mad." "Alas, sire, it is but too true." Louis made a gesture of indescribable anger and alarm, and then drew himself up as if the sudden blow had struck him at the same moment in heart and countenance. "In France!" he cried. "The usurper in France! Then they did not watch over this man. Who knows, they were perhaps in league with him." "Oh, sire," exclaimed the Duc de Blacas, "M. d'André is not a man to be accused of treason, sire. We have all been blind, and the Minister of Police has shared this general blindness. That is all." "But," said Villefort, then suddenly checking himself. He was silent. Then he continued. "Your pardon, sire," he said, bowing. "My zeal carried me away. Will your Majesty deign to excuse me?" "Speak, sir, speak boldly," replied Louis. You alone forewarned us of the evil. Now try and aid us with the remedy." "Sire," said Villefort, "the usurper is detested in the south, and it seems to me that if he ventured into the south it would be easy to raise Languedoc and Provence against him." "Yes, assuredly," replied the minister, "but he is advancing by Gap and Sisteron." "Advancing! He is advancing!" said Louis. "Is he then advancing on Paris?" The Minister of Police maintained a silence, which was equivalent to a complete avowal. "And Dauphine, sir?" inquired the king of Villefort. "Do you think it's possible to rouse that as well as Provence?" "Sire, I am sorry to tell your Majesty a cruel fact, but the feeling in Dauphine is quite the reverse of that in Provence or Languedoc. The mountaineers are Bonapartists, sire." "Then," murmured Louis, "he was well informed. And how many men had he with him?" "I do not know, sire," answered the Minister of Police. "What, you do not know? Have you neglected to obtain information on that point? Of course it is of no consequence," he added, with a withering smile. "Sire, it was impossible to learn. The despatch simply stated the fact of the landing and the route taken by the usurper." "And how did this despatch reach you?" inquired the king. The minister bowed his head, and while a deep color overspread his cheeks, he stammered out, "By the telegraph, sire." Louis advanced a step and folded his arms over his chest as Napoleon would have done. "So then," he exclaimed, turning pale with anger, 7 conjoined and allied armies overthrew that man. A miracle of heaven replaced me on the throne of my fathers after 25 years of exile. I have, during those 25 years, spared no pains to understand the people of France and the interests which were confided in me. And now, when I see the fruition of my wishes almost within reach, the power I hold in my hands bursts and shatters me to atoms." "Sire, it is a fatality," murmured the minister, feeling that the pressure of circumstances, however light a thing to destiny, was too much for any human strength to endure. "What our enemies say of us is true, then. We have learned nothing, forgotten nothing. If I were betrayed as he was, I would console myself, but to be in the midst of persons elevated by myself to places of honor, who ought to watch over me more carefully than over themselves, for my fortune is theirs. Before me they were nothing, after me they will be nothing, and perish miserably from incapacity, ineptitude. Oh yes, sir, you are right, it is fatality." The minister quailed before this outburst of sarcasm. M. de Blacas wiped the moisture from his brow. Villefort smiled within himself, for he felt his increased importance. "To fall," cried King Louis, who at the first glance had sounded the abyss on which the monarchy hung suspended. "To fall, and learn that fall by telegraph! Oh, I would rather mount the scaffold of my brother Louis XVI. Then thus descend the staircase at Tuileries, driven away by ridicule. Ridicule, sir! Why, you know not its power in France, and yet you ought to know it. Sire, sire, murmured the minister, for pity's approach, Villefort, resumed the king, addressing the young man who, motionless and breathless, was listening to a conversation on which depended the destiny of a kingdom. Approach and tell Monsieur that it is possible to know beforehand all that he has not known. Sire, it was really impossible to learn secrets which that man concealed from all the world. Really impossible, yes, that is a great word, sir. Unfortunately, there are great words, as there are great men. I have measured them. Really impossible for a minister who has an office, agents, spies, and 1,500,000 francs for secret service money to know what is going on at 60 leagues from the coast of France. Well then, see, here is a gentleman who had none of these resources at his disposal. Gentlemen, only a simple magistrate who learned more than you with all your police, and who would have saved my crown if, like you, he had the power of directing a telegraph. The look of the minister of police was turned with a concentrated spite on Villefort, who bent his head in modest triumph. I do not mean that for you, Blackus, continued Louis, for if you have discovered nothing, at least you have had the good sense to persevere in your suspicions. Any other than yourself would have considered the disclosure of Villefort insignificant, or else dictated by venal ambition. These words were in allusion to the sentiments which the minister of police had uttered with such confidence an hour before. Villefort understood the king's intent. Any other person would perhaps have been overcome by such intoxicating draught of praise, but he feared to make for himself a mortal enemy of the police minister, although he saw that Dandre was irrevocably lost. In fact, the minister, who, in the plenitude of his power, had been unable to unearth Napoleon's secret, might in despair at his own downfall interrogate Dante and lay so bare the motives of Villefort's plot. Realizing this, Villefort came to the rescue of the crestfallen minister, instead of aiding to crush him. Sire, said Villefort, the suddenness of this event must prove to your majesty that the issue is in the hands of Providence. What your majesty is pleased to attribute to me as profound perspicacity is simply owing to chance, and I have profited by that chance like a good and devoted servant, that's all. Do not attribute to me more than I deserve, sire, that your majesty may never have occasion to recall the first opinion you have been placed to form of me. The minister of police thanked the young man by an eloquent look, and Villefort understood that he had succeeded in his design, that is to say, that without forfeiting the gratitude of the king he had made a friend of one on whom in case of necessity he might rely. "'Tis well," resumed the king, "and now, gentlemen," he continued, turning towards M. de Blacas and the minister of police, "I have no further occasion for you, and you may retire. What now remains to do is in the department of the minister of war." "Fortunately, sire," said M. de Blacas, "we can rely on the army. Your majesty knows how every report confirms their loyalty and attachment." "Do not mention reports, Duke, to me, for I know now what confidence to place in them. Yet speaking of reports, Baron, have you learned with regard to the affair of Rue St. Jacques?" "The affair at Rue St. Jacques!" exclaimed Villefort, unable to repress an exclamation. Thus suddenly pausing, he added, "Your pardon, sire, but my devotion to your majesty has made me forget, not the respect I have, for that is too deeply engraved in my heart, but the rules of etiquette." Go on, sir," replied the king. "You have today earned the right to make inquiries here." "Sire," interposed the minister of police, "I came a moment ago to give your majesty fresh information which I had obtained on this head, when your majesty's attention was attracted by the terrible event that has occurred in the Gulf, and now these facts will cease to interest your majesty." "On the contrary, sir, on the contrary," said Louis. "This affair seems to me to have decided connection with that which occupies our attention, and the death of General Quesnel will perhaps put us on the direct track of great internal conspiracy." At the name of General Quesnel, Villefort trembled. "Everything points to the conclusion, sire," said the minister of police. that death was not the result of suicide as we first believed, but as of assassination. General Quesnel, it appears, had just left a Bonapartist club when he disappeared. An unknown person had been with him that morning, and made an appointment with him in the Rue Saint-Jacques. Unfortunately, the general's valet, who was dressing his hair at the moment when the stranger entered, heard the street mentioned, but did not catch the number. As the police minister related this to the king, Villefort, who looked as if his very life hung on the speaker's lips, turned alternately red and pale. The king looked towards him. Do you not think with me, M. de Villefort, that General Quesnel, whom they believed attached to the usurper, but who was really entirely devoted to me, has perished the victim of a Bonapartist ambush? It is probable, sire, replied Villefort, but that is all. Is that all that's known? They are on the track of meeting the man who appointed the meeting with him. On his track, said Villefort. Yes, the servant has given his description. He is a man from 50 to 52 years of age, dark with black eyes, covered with shaggy eyebrows and a thick mustache. He was dressed in a blue frock coat, buttoned up to the chin, and wore his buttonhole the rosette of an officer of the Legion of Honor. Yesterday, a person exactly corresponding with this description was followed, but he was lost sight of at the corner of Rue de la Jesuine and the Rue de Coqueron. Villefort leaned on the back of an armchair, for as the minister of police went on speaking, he felt his legs bend under him. But when he learned that the unknown had escaped the vigilance of the agent who followed him, he breathed again. Continue to seek for this man, sir, said the king to the minister of police. For if, as I am all but convinced, General Quesnel, who would have been so useful to us at this moment, has been murdered, his assassins, Bonapartists or not, shall be cruelly punished. It is required all Villefort's coolness not to betray the terror with which this declaration of the king inspired him. How strange, continued the king with some asperity. The police think that they have disposed of the whole matter when they say a murder has been committed, and especially so when they can add, and we are on the track of the guilty persons. Sire, your majesty will, I trust, be amply satisfied on this point at least? We shall see. I will no longer detain you, M. de Villefort, for you must be fatigued after so long a journey. Go and rest. Of course you stopped at your father's? A feeling of faintness came over Villefort. No, sire, he replied. I alighted at the Hotel de Madrid in the Rue de Tournon. But you have seen him? Sire, I went straight to the Duke of Blacas. But you will see him then? I think not, sire. Ah, I forget, said Louis, smiling in a manner which proved that all these questions were not made without a motive. I forgot you and Noirtier are not on the best terms possible, and that is another sacrifice made to the royal cause, and for which you shall be recompensed. Sire, this kindness your majesty deigns to evince towards me is recompense which so far surpasses my utmost ambition that I have nothing more to ask for. Never mind, sir, we will not forget you. Make your mind easy. In the meanwhile, the king here detached the cross of the Legion of Honor, which he usually wore over his blue coat near the cross of St. Louis, above the order of Notre Dame du Mont Carmel and St. Lazare, and gave it to Villefort. In the meanwhile, take this cross. Sire, said Villefort, your majesty mistakes. This is an officer's cross. Ma foi, said Louis, take it, such as it is, for I have not the time to procure another. Blacas, let it be your care to see that the brevet is made out and sent to M. de Villefort. Villefort's eyes were filled with tears of joy and pride. He took the cross and kissed it. And now, he said, may I inquire the orders with which your majesty deigns to honor me? Take what rest you require, and remember that if you are not able to serve me here in Paris, you may be of the greatest service to me in Marseille. Sire, replied Villefort, bowing, in an hour I shall have quitted Paris. Go, sir, said the king, and should I forget you, king's memories are short. Do not be afraid to bring yourself to my recollection. Baron, send for the minister of war. Blacas remained. Ah, sir, said the minister of police to Villefort as they left the Tuileries, you entered by luck's door. Your fortune is made. Will it be long first? Muttered Villefort, saluting the minister whose career was ended, and looking about him for a hackney coach. One passed at the moment, which he hailed. He gave his address to the driver, and springing in, threw himself on the seat and gave loose to dreams of ambition. 10 minutes afterwards, Villefort reached his hotel, ordered horses to be ready in 2 hours, and asked to have his breakfast brought to him. He was about to begin his repast when the sound of the bell rang sharp and loud. The valet opened the door, and Villefort heard someone speak his name. "Who could know that I was here already?" said the young man. The valet entered. "Well," said Villefort, "what is it? Who rang? Who asked for me?" "A stranger who will not send in his name." "A stranger who will not send in his name? What can he want with me?" "He wishes to speak to you." "To me?" "Yes." "Did he mention my name?" "Yes." "What sort of person is he?" "Why, sir, a man about 50. "Short or tall?" "About your own height, sir." "Dark or fair?" "Dark, very dark, with black eyes, black hair, and black eyebrows." "And how dressed?" asked Villefort quickly. "In a blue frock coat, buttoned up close, decorated with the Legion of Honor." "It is he," said Villefort, turning pale. "Eh, pardieu," said the individual whose description we have given twice, entering the door. "What a great deal of ceremony! Is it the custom in Marseille for sons to keep their fathers waiting in their ante-rooms?" "Father!" cried Villefort. "Then I was not deceived. I felt sure it must be you." "Well, then, if you felt so sure," replied the newcomer, putting his cane in a corner and his hat on the chair, "allow me to say, my dear Gerard, that it was not very filial of you to keep me waiting at the door." "Leave us, Germain," said Villefort. The servant quitted the apartment with evident signs of astonishment. Chapter 12. Father and Son. M. Noirtier, for it was indeed he, looked after the servant until the door was closed, and then, fearing no doubt that he might be overheard in the antechamber, he opened the door again. Nor was the precaution useless, as appeared from the rapid retreat of Germain, who proved that he was not exempt from the sin which ruined our first parents. M. Noirtier then took the trouble to close and bolt the antechamber door, then that of the bedchamber, and then extended his hand to Villefort, who had followed all his motions with surprise he could not conceal. "Well now, my dear Gerard," said he to the young man with a very significant look, "do you know, you seem as if you are not very glad to see me." "My dear father," said Villefort, "I am, on the contrary, delighted, but I so little expected your visit that it has somewhat overcome me." "But, my dear fellow," replied M. Noirtier, seating himself, "I might say the same thing to you. When you announced to me your wedding for the 28th of February, and on the 3rd of March you turn up here in Paris." "And if I have come, my dear father," said Gerard, drawing closer to M. Noirtier, "do not complain, for it is for you that I came, and my journey will be your salvation." "Ah, indeed," said M. Noirtier, stretching himself out at his ease in the chair. "Really, pray tell me about it, for it must be interesting." "Father, you have heard speak of a certain Bonapartist club in the Rue Saint Jacques?" "Number 53, yes, I am vice-president." "Father, your coolness makes me shudder. Why, my dear boy, when a man has been proscribed by the mountaineers, has escaped from Paris in a hay-cart, been hunted over the plains of Bordeaux by Robespierre's bloodhounds, he becomes accustomed to most things. But go on, what about the club in Rue Saint Jacques?" "Why, they induced General Quesnel to go there, and General Quesnel, who quitted his own house at 9 o'clock in the evening, was found the next day in the Seine." "And who told you this fine story?" "The king himself." "Well, then, in return for your story," continued Noirtier, "I will tell you another." "My dear father, I think I already know what you are about to tell me." "Ah, have you heard of the landing of the Emperor?" "Not so loud, father, I entreat of you, for your own sake as well as mine." "Yes, I heard this news, and I knew it even before you could, for 3 days ago I posted from Marseille to Paris, with all possible speed, half desperate at the enforced delay." "3 days ago? You are crazy. Why, 3 days ago the Emperor had not landed." "No matter, I was aware of his intention." "How did you know about it?" by a letter addressed to you from the island of Elba, to me, to you, and which I discovered in the pocket-book of the messenger. Had that letter fallen into the hands of another, you, my dear father, would probably ere this have been shot. Villefort's father laughed. Come, come, said he, will the Restoration adopt imperial methods so promptly? Shot, my dear boy, what an idea! Where is the letter you speak of? I know you too well to suppose you would allow such a thing to pass you. I burnt it, for fear that even a fragment should remain, for that letter must have led to your condemnation, and the destruction of your future prospects, replied Nordier. Yes, I can easily comprehend that. But I have nothing to fear while I have you to protect me. I do better than that, sir, I save you. You do? Why, really the thing becomes more and more dramatic. Explain yourself. I must refer again to the club in the Rue Saint-Jacques. It appears that this club is rather a bore to the police. Why didn't they search more vigilantly? They would have found. They have not found, but they are on the track. Yes, that's the usual phrase. I am quite familiar with it. When the police is at fault, it declares that it is on the track, and the government patiently waits the day when it comes to say with a sneaking air that the track is lost. Yes, but they have found a corpse. The general has been killed, and in all countries they call that a murder. A murder, do you call it? Why, there is nothing to prove that the general was murdered. People are found every day in the Seine having thrown themselves in or having been drowned from not knowing how to swim. Father, you know very well that the general was not a man to drown himself in despair, and people do not bathe in the Seine in the month of January. No, no, do not be deceived. This was a murder in every sense of the word. And who thus designated it? The king himself. The king? I thought he was a philosopher enough to allow that there was no murder in politics. In politics, my dear fellow, you know as well as I do, there are no men but ideas, no feelings but interests. In politics, we do not kill a man, we only remove an obstacle, that is all. Would you like to know how matters have progressed? Well, I will tell you. It was thought reliance might be placed on General Quesnel. He was recommended to us from the island of Elba. One of us went to him and invited him to the Rue Saint-Jacques, where he would find some friends. He came there, and the plan was unfolded to him for leaving Elba, the projected landing. When he had heard and comprehended all to the fullest extent, he replied that he was a royalist, and then they all looked at each other. He was made to take an oath, and did so, but with such an ill grace that it was really tempting Providence to swear thus. And yet, in spite of that, the general was allowed to depart free, perfectly free. Yet he did not return home. What could that mean? Why, my dear fellow, that on leaving us he lost his way, that's all. A murder, really, Villefort, you surprise me. You, a deputy procureur, to found an accusation on such bad premises. Did I ever say to you, when you were fulfilling your character as a royalist, and cut off the head of one of my party, my son, you have committed a murder? No, I said, very well, sir, you have gained the victory. Tomorrow, perchance, it will be our turn. But, father, take care when our turn comes. Our revenge will be sweeping. I do not understand you. You rely on the usurper's return? We do. You are mistaken. He will not advance 2 leagues into the interior of France without being followed, tracked, and caught like a wild beast. My dear fellow, the Emperor is at this moment on the way to Grenoble. On the 10th or 12th he will be at Lyons, and on the 20th or 25th in Paris. The people will rise, yes, to go and meet him. He has but a handful of men with him, and armies will be dispatched against him. Yes, to escort him to the capital. Really, my dear Gerard, you are but a child. You think yourself well informed because the telegraph has told you 3 days after the landing. The usurper has landed at Cannes with several men. He is pursued. But where is he? What is he doing? You do not know at all. And in this way they will chase him to Paris without drawing a trigger. Grenoble and Lyons are faithful cities, and they will oppose to him an impassable barrier. Grenoble will open her gates to him with enthusiasm, and Lyons will hasten to welcome him. Believe me, we are as well informed as you, and our police are as good as your own. Would you like proof of it? Well, you wish to conceal your journey from me, and yet I knew of your arrival half an hour after you had passed the barrier. You gave your direction to no one but your position, yet I have your address, and in proof I am here the very instant you are going to sit at the table. Ring then, if you please, for a second knife, fork, and plate, and we will dine together. Indeed, replied Anne, you really do seem well informed. This thing is simple enough. You who are here have only the means to produce. We who are in expectation have much devotion prompts. Devotion, said Villefort with a sneer. Yes, devotion, for that is, I believe, the phrase for hopeful ambition. And Villefort's father extended his hand to the bell-rope to summon the servant whom his son had not called. Villefort caught his arm. Wait, my dear father, said the young man. One word more. Say on. How stupid the royalist police must be. They do know one terrible thing. What is that? The description of the man who, on the morning of the day General Quesnel disappeared, presented himself at his house. Oh, the admirable police have found that out, have they? And what may be this description? Dark hair, eyebrows, and whiskers, blue frock coat buttoned up to the chin, rosette of an officer of the Legion of Honor in his buttonhole, and a hat with a wide brim and a cane. Aha, that's it, is it? Said Noirtier. And why, then, have they not laid hands on him? Because yesterday or the day before they lost sight of him at the corner of Rue de Coquerin. Didn't I say that your police were good for nothing? Yes, but they might catch him yet. True, said Noirtier, looking carelessly around him. True, if this person were not on his guard as he is. And he added with a smile, he will make a few changes in his personal appearance. At these words he rose and put off his frock coat and cravat, went towards the table on which lay his son's toilet articles, lathered his face, took a razor, and with a firm hand cut off the compromising whiskers. Villefort watched him with alarm, not devoid of admiration. His whiskers cut off, Noirtier gave another turn to his hair, took instead his black cravat, a colored neckerchief which lay at the top of an open portmanteau, put it on in lieu of his blue and high-buttoned frock coat, a coat of Villefort's of dark brown and cut away in front, tried on before the glass a narrow-brimmed hat of his son, which appeared to fit him perfectly, and leaving his cane in the corner where he had deposited it, he took up a small bamboo switch, cut the air with it once or twice, and walked about with that easy swagger which was one of his principal characteristics. Well, turning towards his wondering son, when the disguise was completed, well, do you think your police will recognize me now? No, father, stammered Villefort, at least I hope not. And now, my dear boy, continued Noirtier, I rely on your prudence to remove all the things which I leave in your care. Oh, rely on me, said Villefort. Yes, yes, and now I believe you are right, and that you have really saved my life. Be assured I will return the favor hereafter. Villefort shook his head. Are you not convinced yet? I hope at least that you may be mistaken. Shall you see the king again? Perhaps. Would you pass in his eyes for a prophet? Prophets of evil are not in favor at the court, father. True, but some day they do them justice, and supposing a second restoration, you would then pass for a great man. Well, what should I say to the king? Say this to him. Sire, you are deceived as to the feeling of France, as to the opinions of the towns and the prejudices of the army. He whom in Paris you call the Corsican ogre, who had never styled the usurper, is already saluted at Bonaparte as Bonaparte at Lyons, an emperor at Grenoble. You think he is tracked, pursued, captured. He is advancing as rapidly as his own eagles. The soldiers you believe to be dying with hunger, worn out from fatigue, ready to desert, gather like atoms of snow about the rolling ball as it hastens onward. Sire, go, leave France to its real master, to him who acquired it not by purchase but by right of conquest. Go, sire, not that you incur any risk, for your adversary is powerful enough to show you mercy, but because it would be humiliating for a grandson of St. Louis to owe his life to a man of Arco, Marengo, Austerlitz. Tell him this, Gerard, or rather tell him nothing. Keep your journey a secret. Do not boast of what you have come to Paris to do, or have done. Return with all speed, enter Marseille at night, and your house by the back door, and there remain quiet, submissive, secret, and above all, inoffensive. For this time, I swear to you, we shall act like powerful men who know their enemies. Go, my son, go, my dear Gerard, and by your obedience to my paternal orders, or, if you prefer it, friendly counsels, we will keep you in your place. This will be, added Noirtier with a smile, one means by which you may have a second time saved me, if the political balance should some day take another turn and cast you aloft while hurling me down. Adieu, my dear Gerard, and at your next journey alight at my door. Noirtier left the room when he had finished, with the same calmness that had characterized him during the whole of this remarkable and trying conversation. Villefort, pale and agitated, ran to the window, put aside the curtain, and saw him pass, cool and collected, by 2 or 3 ill-looking men at the corner of the street, who were there, perhaps, to arrest a man with black whiskers and a blue frock-coat, and a hat with a broad brim. Villefort stood watching breathless until his father had disappeared at the Rue Bassy. Then he turned to the various articles he had left behind, put the black cravat and the blue frock-coat at the bottom of the portmanteau, threw the hat into the dark closet, broke the cane into small bits and flung it into the fire, put on his travelling cap and called his valet, checked with a look the 1,000 questions he was ready to ask, paid his bill, sprang into his carriage, which was ready, learned at Lyons that Bonaparte had entered Grenoble, and in the midst of the tumult which prevailed along the road, at length reached Marseille, a prey to the hopes and fears which enter to the heart of a man with ambition and its first successes.